The vast, churning canvas of the Pacific was a world away from the drawing boards and test runs of America's nascent naval programs. Yet, as the drumbeats of war echoed across Europe in the late 1930s, a quiet revolution was stirring within the U.S. Navy. The urgent need for high-speed, maneuverable vessels capable of striking with lethal force and vanishing into the night became undeniable. This necessity would accelerate the motor torpedo boat program, the PT boat, not as a smooth, pre-planned marvel of engineering, but as a chaotic trial-and-error odyssey driven by the looming global conflict. For years, the U.S. Navy had largely dismissed the concept of small, fast torpedo craft, believing resources better spent on the titans of the fleet. While European navies, from Yarrow's early designs in 1905 to the Italian MAS boats and British coastal motor boats of World War I, continuously refined these Mosquito Fleet vessels, the American General Board remained skeptical fleet. Yet, a few far-sighted officers, like Rear Admirals Joseph Strauss and Emery S. Land, recognized the continuous and marked developments abroad, arguing that vessels of considerable military effectiveness should be explored. By 1937, their persistence paid off. An experimental PT boat program was approved, designers were invited, and initial contracts were awarded in 1939 for early 58-foot experimental boats, vessels that would soon prove problematic. The 58-footers from Fisher Boat Works and Miami Shipbuilding Company suffered from delayed, obsolete engines, while Higgins Industries struggled with designs. The Philadelphia Navy Yard's own government-designed boats, PT-7 and PT-8, were tragically overweight, burdened by destroyer fittings, and PT-8, in particular, was crippled by Allison engines that lacked crucial self-starters and reverse gears, rendering maneuvering a nightmare. A pivotal shift arrived with foreign influence. British boat designer Hubert Scott Payne had been perfecting his high-speed craft since 1934. In January 1939, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Charles Edison, recognizing the gap in U.S. capabilities, discussed British PT boats with Henry R. Sutphen of Electric Boat Company. Sutphen, along with Elco's chief designer, Irwin Chase, acquired one of Scott Payne's 70-foot models. Admiral Thomas C. Hart championed the acquisition, deeming it highly advisable that such craft be obtained as a check on our own development. On September 5th of attained is a something to vemicated. 1939, just 2 days after Germany invaded Poland, the Scott Payne boat, designated PT-9, dramatically arrived in New York, a harbinger of the war to come. Commander Robert B. Carney, inspecting PT-9 during rigorous rough water trials that November, gave an unqualified approval, praising its amazing performance as a sea boat in heavy seas, despite his initial skepticism. This led to Elco receiving a contract for 11 more boats, though Elco officials like Sutphen experienced a rude shock from the hodgepodge of partial sets of blueprints provided by Scott Payne, forcing them to create new plans from scratch. Growing dissatisfaction with the performance of these experimental U.S. designs culminated in the dramatic Plywood Derby races of 1941. The first, held off New London in July, pitted Elco's 77-footers against other designs in moderate swells. While Elco boats demonstrated superior speed, structural flaws were immediately evident. Cracks appeared in the decks of PT-26 and PT-33, and PT-70 suffered serious structural damage. The second, Derby, in August, pushed the limits even further. With heavy cross swells of 6 to 8 feet and occasional waves up to 15 feet, in a confused sea off Block Island, the Elco boats performed well but were noted as rougher riding. Andrew Jackson Higgins, a flamboyant builder, even entered his own modified design, which was enthusiastically accepted as superior by some. The Plywood Derby starkly exposed the deficiencies, forcing a critical re-evaluation. "We are convinced that the boat isn't big enough to do the things we want it to do," articulated Captain E.L. Cochrane of the Bureau of Ships in October 1941, "and we need a heavier, more effective, more powerful boat." This watershed moment led to the standardization around the more robust 75 to 82-foot Elco and Higgins models cases, marking a crucial step towards mass production and combat readiness just as war exploded across the Pacific. The morning of December 7, 1941 dawned with an inferno at Pearl Harbor. thrusting America into World War II. 6 PT boats, moored at the submarine base, were caught in the chaos. Ensign E. Ball, spotting Japanese insignia on diving planes, screamed, "Man the guns, crews," like Joy Van Zyl de Jong and George B. Huffman on PT-23 scrambled to their 50 caliber machine gun turrets, claiming first blood on 2 planes. 6 other PTTs slated for shipment to the Philippines scrambled to their 50K of machine gun turrets, claiming speed. Their fuel tanks blanketed by carbon dioxide, their crews, in an act of ingenious improvisation, cut hydraulic lines to manually slew their turrets, pouring out over 4,000 rounds of 50 caliber in a desperate defense. But it was in the Philippines that the nascent PT boat squadrons faced their true crucible. Squadron 3, with its mere 6 boats. Squadron 3, with its mere 6 boats, PTs 31, 32, 33, 35 and 41, was already stationed in Manila Bay. Poised to bear the brunt of the Japanese onslaught, the rapid Japanese advance rendered pre-planned deployments impossible. Forcing these existing boats into desperate improvisational combat roles in what would become known as the dark months of the hopeless defense of the Philippines, on December 10th, the first heavy air attack on Manila Bay saw Japanese high-level bombers at 20,000 feet beyond the PT boats' range. But when 5 bombers dove, the PTs demonstrated their maneuverability, successfully evading direct hits. PT-31 claimed 2 planes shot down. PT-35 claimed 1, showcasing their initial combat potential beyond mere torpedo attacks. This agility, with exicity, however, could not protect the infrastructure. The Cavite Navy Yard, the squadron's primary base, was devastated, leaving the entire yard and 1/3 of the city of Cavite ablaze. Thousands of drums of critical 100-octane gasoline were lost. PT boats immediately transported wounded from the burning yard to Canasao Hospital, then retreated to Sisiman Bay, a meager little cove just east of Mariveles Harbour, with only a small fishing dock and a few native nipper huts. Lieutenant John Bulkley, with remarkable foresight, had already stored 9 engines in private garages in Manila, a lifeline in the coming months. As the Asiatic fleet withdrew, Squadron 3 was left with severely limited resources. The submarine tender Canopus provided miracles of improvisation for repairs. But a war diary entry lamented, "Motor torpedo boats are rapidly deteriorating due to lack of spare parts and bad gasoline. Sabotaged gasoline containing a soluble wax deposit clogged strainers and carburetors, necessitating the cleaning of carburetors and strainers hourly, while lubricating oil contained sand. Crews were exhausted, facing food shortages, with naval personnel on 2 meals a day from December 16th. On December 24th, PT-33 ran aground on a coral reef, abandoned and burned on December 26th to deny it to the enemy. Yet, amidst this desperation, the PT boats performed acts of extraordinary heroism. On the night of December 17th, an explosion in Sisiman Cove revealed the SS Corregidor, which had struck a mine. PTs 32, 34, 4%, PTs 34 and 35 raced into the dead blackness, rescuing 296 survivors. PT-32, a 77-foot boat designed for 11, heroically took aboard an astonishing 196 passengers. Their versatility was evident. On January 18th, PTs 34 and 31 attacked 4 enemy ships in the Binanga Bay raid, with PT-34 sinking a reported 5,000-ton freighter. A hot-run torpedo on PT-34 was bravely secured by John Martino, using toilet paper to stop its impeller. Days later, PT-41 strafed Japanese soldiers near Ternate, and PT-34 sank a landing barge, taking 2 wounded Japanese prisoners, despite being hit 14 times. Even PT-32, with a jury-rigged hull and a top speed of only 22 knots, engaged a large ship, observing an explosion that suggested a hit. PT boats were proving invaluable, not just as torpedo attack vessels, but for reconnaissance, anti-aircraft defense, and daring rescue operations. As the Japanese encirclement of Corregidor tightened in early 1942, a critical decision loomed: the evacuation of General Douglas MacArthur. A submarine was initially considered, but increased Japanese naval activity and surface patrols off Corregidor forced a change to PT boats. which offered speed and stealth to guest, wear, and surface patrols off Corregidor. On March 10th, Admiral Rockwell issued orders to Lieutenant Bulkley, commander of PT-41, to lead the perilous mission. On the evening of March 11th, MacArthur, his chief of staff, and other personnel boarded PT-41. PT-32, commanded by Lieutenant Junior Grade Schumacher, a boat already in a dire state, with 2 engines out and leaking badly, prepared for its own passengers. The journey south was brutal. The seas were rough, sheets of water rising over the bows and lashing the helmsmen's faces, making formation difficult. Navigation was pretty sketchy, as Admiral Rockwell recalled. Amidst heavy seas and rain squalls, Schumacher, desperate for speed, jettisoned a deckload of gasoline from PT-32. Drenched and exhausted, they reached Cagayan by March 13th, where MacArthur's party transferred to waiting B-17, successfully flying to Australia. This successful, albeit perilous, evacuation solidified the PT boat's strategic importance for high-value personnel transport. The challenges continued. President Manuel Quezon and his large party also required evacuation. On March 18th, PT-41 and PT-35 departed Cagayan to meet them. PT-35, however, struck a submerged object, ripping a gaping hole in her bow, forcing her crew to bail with buckets. PT-41, under Lieutenant Bulkley, proceeded alone, departing with Quezon's full load and a vast quantity of luggage. The party safely landed at Oroquieta. These critical missions demonstrated the boat's capability to carry significant numbers under duress. Despite their limitations, Squadron 3 boats had endured 3 months of relentless operations without spares or adequate repairs, leading to significant deterioration. PT-34, commanded by Lieutenant Kelly, had previously run hard aground on Coral, mangling shafts and propellers. Yet, the crews, like Dad Cleland, maintained a pragmatic resolve. His motto, "You fight 'em, and I'll fix 'em," echoing their spirit. The PT boat's most dramatic offensive action occurred off Cebu. After PT-34 was back in the water, on April 8th, both PT-34 and PT-41 engaged a Japanese cruiser. As the cruiser's searchlight blazed through the night, Petty Officer DeWitt L. Glover cried out, "Jumping Jesus, there she is!" Lieutenant Kelly recounted PT-34 pursuing the cruiser at maximum speed, closing to within 300 yards, under intense automatic fire. Torpedoman James D. Light and John L. Houlihan manually fired 2 Mark 14 torpedoes. Kelly reported seeing 2 spouts of water, some 20 feet high and 30 feet apart, appear amidships at the cruiser's waterline at 5-second intervals, indicating direct hits. The cruiser's searchlight faded, its guns fell silent. Simultaneously, PT-34, attempting to retire, was taken under fire by a destroyer, appearing trapped between the 2 enemy warships. Kelly's crew, by violent zigzagging and right-angle turns, evaded further hits. The engagement, however, took a heavy toll. PT-34's center propeller and strut were damaged. Her mast shot away, and her topside riddled with 50 caliber holes. Kelly attempted to reach Cebu for medical aid, but operating in daylight was considered suicidal. Japanese float planes soon attacked. Diving out of the sun, a bomb landed close off PT-34's port bow, blowing off a machine gun and riddling the boat with holes. Willard J. Reynolds, CCSTD, was hit by shrapnel. With the engine room flooded with 3 feet of water and engines failing, Kelly decided they could no longer fight. The crew beached PT-34 on a coral pinnacle, abandoning and destroying the boat by fire and explosion. The end of Squadron 3's operational capacity quickly followed. On April 12, PT-33 was burned. An attempt to haul PT-41 overland to Lake Lanao failed, and it too was destroyed. By April 13th, Lieutenant Bulkley was flown to Australia, with Kelly and others following. Though specific boats were lost, their crew's resilience, courage, and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds were undeniable. MacArthur himself, recognizing their potential, urgently requested 100 or more MTBs, eventually pushing for 200 boats if possible. This desperate struggle in the Philippines, though ending in the loss of Squadron 3's boats, underscored their immense value. leading to a significant strategic commitment to their development in the Southwest Pacific. Despite the pounding and discomfort that crews cursed them for, they loved these boats for the beauty that is born of their speed, a testament to their critical and often harrowing role in the Pacific War. The desperate struggle in the Philippines, though ending in the loss of Squadron 3's boats, had solidified the PT boats' strategic importance. General MacArthur, recognizing their potential, urgently requested 100 or more MTBs, eventually pushing for 200 boats if possible. This desperate plea, echoing across the Pacific, ignited a rapid, expansive build-up. From a mere 29 boats, in December 1941, the US PET boat program swelled to more than 29 squadrons by December 1943, transforming these agile craft into an integral part of the naval war effort. Captain Robert J. Bulkley, Jr., who would later chronicle their story, felt an immediate love at first sight for these vessels, understanding their role as new weapons of opportunity that could fill critical gaps in naval strategy. This explosive growth demanded an entirely new infrastructure for training and support. Specialized centers like U.S. Naval Station Taboga and the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's training center became vital crucibles, forging citizen sailors into cohesive combat-ready crews. Simultaneously, ingenious innovations in base construction, utilizing a functional component system, allowed for the rapid establishment of operational hubs in the most remote and hostile corners of the Pacific, a logistical marvel that kept the burgeoning fleet in the fight. Nowhere was this burgeoning force more desperately needed or more severely tested than in the dense, dark, and treacherous waters around Guadalcanal. The island's strategic value for both sides led to a brutal, protracted struggle for control of the southern Solomons. The Allies fired as every entage battle Godrage's story awaited. Often lacking sufficient conventional sea power in the early stages, found themselves relying on the PT boats to counter the relentless Japanese reinforcement and bombardment efforts. The infamous Tokyo Express. Night after night, the deep-throated roar of their engines became a familiar if terrifying sound in the close quarters of Iron Bottom Bay. A graveyard of ships, these were the proving grounds where PT boats, often derided as spit kits by larger ship crews, would carve out an often unacknowledged yet undeniably crucial role. Operating with just 2 or 3 officers and 12 to 15 men on a small boat, crews lived and fought in an intimacy that bred an extraordinary esprit de corps, each man vital to his boat's survival. They faced overwhelming odds, battling technological limitations like the lack of reliable radar and enduring immense logistical strains. Yet, with shining courage, they engaged the enemy, disrupting Japanese attempts to bombard Henderson Field and land troops, creating a psychological and tactical deterrent that bought precious time for the beleaguered Allied forces. The campaign's relentless pace took a severe toll. Crews, after nerve-shattering nights, under blinding lights and deadly salvos of explosive shells, would catch only a few hours of sleep before spending the day patching their boats, living on nerves alone. The psychological strain was immense, a constant war of nerves that etched itself onto their faces. The intensity of January 1943 brought the PT flotilla into a gauntlet of engagements, the cost measured in boats lost and men sacrificed. Night after night, PT boats threw themselves against the formidable destroyers of the Tokyo Express, attempting to stem the flow of Japanese reinforcements or harass their evacuation efforts. These were desperate, close-range battles where torpedoes were launched into the blackness, and boats were caught in searchlights, pounded by heavy shellfire. Many boats were hit, some crippled and abandoned, others erupting in flames as gasoline tanks exploded, leaving men in the shark-infested waters. Though costly, these persistent actions inflicted damage and disruption on the Japanese destroyer forces, forcing them to operate under constant threat and contributing significantly to the attrition of their naval power. The chaos and staggering losses of these early operations underscored the urgent need for a more organized approach. The eventual establishment of centralized administrative and logistical support under Captain M. Dupré, Jr. as Commander Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's South Pacific began to address the systemic issues plaguing the PT flotilla. This move brought a measure of order to the frenzied battle, providing better coordination, and much-needed resources to the exhausted crews. The PT boats at Guadalcanal were far from insignificant. Their persistent harassment, the daring surprise attacks, and the torpedo launches, combined with larger naval and air actions, were vital in preventing the complete loss of Guadalcanal. Their role, though often understated in the broader narrative of the Pacific War, was a testament to their adaptability and the unwavering bravery of their crews. They demonstrated conclusively that these small, fast vessels could fill an important need in shallow waters, complementing the achievements of greater ships in greater seas, a legacy that would continue to define their contribution throughout the conflict. As the Allied juggernaut pushed relentlessly through the Solomon Islands and along the New Guinea coastline in 1943, the nature of naval warfare subtly but significantly shifted. Japanese naval dominance, once unquestioned, had been eroded by decisive Allied victories, forcing a desperate change in their logistical strategy. No longer could large transports risk the open seas. Instead, they turned to the shadows, relying on coastal barges, often heavily armed and camouflaged, to ferry troops and supplies under the cloak of darkness. This redefinition of the enemy's lifeline from mighty warships to vulnerable shallow draft vessels transformed the PT boat's primary mission. The Mosquito fleet, initially conceived for daring torpedo runs against capital ships, now became the relentless barge hunters tasked with strangling Japanese supply lines piece by piece. This new imperative demanded a drastic evolution in PT boat designs and armament. Lieutenant Commander John Harley, a visionary within the PT ranks, championed the mounting of heavier weaponry, recognizing that the Mark 8 torpedo, while potent, was overkill and often impractical for the agile, evasive barges. His persistence led to the standardization of 37mm and later 40mm Bofors guns on PT boats. These cannons, with their rapid automatic fire and powerful shells, could blast holes in armored barges, transforming the PTs into formidable anti-barge platforms. This enhanced firepower, coupled with improved radar, allowed PT crews to engage the enemy with greater precision and devastating effect, vastly improving their versatility in the ever-changing combat environment. To sustain this intensified campaign, the establishment of advanced operating bases became paramount. Locations like Lambu Cove, Sterling Island, and Green Island were no longer just temporary anchorages. They became vital forward hubs, dramatically extending PT boat patrol ranges and enabling deeper penetration into enemy territory. These bases, often constructed rapidly by CB detachments using functional component systems, were critical for maintenance, refueling, and crew rest, providing the logistical backbone for operations that stretched hundreds of miles from main command centers. Without these forward outposts, the relentless pressure on Japanese logistics would have been impossible to maintain. Yet, this period of intense operations was not without its own unique and tragic challenges. PT boat crews operating in close proximity to other Allied forces, often in the chaos of night or under poor visibility, found themselves caught in devastating friendly fire incidents. These cruel errors, born of critical failures in communication, inadequate pilot recognition training, and insufficient inter-service coordination, became a tragic dimension of their daily struggle. The sinking of the USS Macaulay in July 1943, a grievous incident where friendly torpedoes mistakenly struck a crippled transport, served as a stark and painful catalyst, underscoring the urgent need for improved communication and operational control, ultimately leading to PT boats being assigned directly under the Commander Amphibious Force. The infamous loss of PT 109, commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy during a disastrous engagement off Kolombangara in August 1943, further exposed critical flaws in PT boat coordination and tactics posing. While the story of its crew's incredible survival became legendary, the incident itself highlighted the dangers of operating independently in a complex multi-force environment. Similarly, the Talisea incidents in March and April 1944 saw multiple friendly fire events, resulting in significant PT boat and aircraft losses due to tragic misidentification. These events painfully debunked any myth that PT boat actions were solely against the enemy. Friendly fire was a significant and tragic reality of their operations. often due to systemic communication breakdowns that cost lives and boats. Despite these immense challenges and heartbreaking losses, PT boats proved to be indispensable. Their versatility extended far beyond offensive torpedo attacks, making them crucial for supporting amphibious landings, conducting vital reconnaissance, and relentlessly interdicting enemy logistics, directly contributing to the isolation and eventual neutralization of Japanese forces. The development of specialized PT tenders like the USS Hilo Portunus and the LST-201, later USS Pontus, along with floating dry docks and repair barges, revolutionized their operational reach. These floating repair shops on deck provided critical repair capabilities in primitive conditions, allowing damaged boats to be quickly patched up and returned to the fight. The LST-201, for instance, boasted a superior 11-ton crane and often towed a dry dock, enabling heavier repairs closer to the front lines. Even small F-ships, slow but steady freighters, were required to transport vital spare parts and specialized equipment, ensuring that the PT squadrons could maintain their relentless pace. PT boats played a vital, often unglamorous role in securing key islands such as Kiriwina and Woodlark, establishing crucial supply points at Nassau Bay, and supporting major offensives like those at Leh, Salamaua, and Finschhafen. Their persistent harassment of Japanese supply lines had a profound impact on enemy ground forces. Major General F.H. Berryman, the Australian Corps commander, wrote a letter of appreciation detailing critical shortages among Japanese troops. Noting that the enemy had resorted to slaughtering and eating pack-carrying animals and was unable to maintain larger forces in the forward area, such reports confirmed that the PT boats, by disrupting enemy logistics, were effectively starving out garrisons and directly contributing to the Allied advance. PT boats were not just offensive weapons. Their multifaceted roles included vital reconnaissance, landing and evacuating troops and scouts, rescuing downed aviators, and providing close fire support during amphibious landings. These varied contributions unequivocally demonstrated their broader strategic importance, cementing their legacy as adaptable, indispensable assets in the relentless island-hopping campaign across the Southwest Pacific. The Pacific War, often envisioned as a sun-drenched canvas of coral reefs and turquoise waters, held a starkly different reality at its northernmost reaches. Far from the steamy tropics, the Aleutian Islands stretched like a broken spine into the Bering Sea, a desolate, storm-battered arc where the environment itself proved a more formidable adversary than any enemy. Here PT boats, designed for speed and agility in warmer climes, faced their most brutal test, challenging the very notion that all Mosquito Fleet operations were confined to balmy seas. The Japanese occupation of Attu and Kiska in June 1942 ignited a frantic race for islands, drawing American forces, including PT boats, into this unforgiving chain. By September, early PTs, like 22, 24, 27, and 28, were already at Adak. Their crews immediately plunged into a world of relentless storms and treacherous fogs. Navigation became a daily gamble against jagged shorelines, submerged rocks, and sudden-plussed rocks and sudden-behinded rocks, violent gusts known as willy-waws that could sweep down mountainsides at over 100 knots, thick ice 2 to 4 inches deep, often coated vessels, turning decks into skating rinks and threatening to capsize the small craft. Life aboard these boats was an exercise in sheer endurance. Crews battled icy water, heavy frost inside bulkheads, and the constant pounding of heavy seas. The only respite from the biting cold often came from a single 2-burner gasoline stove, its meager warmth a stark counterpoint to the freezing conditions. Mechanical failures were rampant. PTS 24 and 27, in particular, were described by Lieutenant James A. Danver as so old they actually weaved as they went through the water, their seams opening under the strain, allowing water to pour in. The Higgins boats of Squadron 13, though sturdily built, had a tendency to nose under at low speeds, drenching crews in frigid spray. Even attempts at comfort backfired, as early motor-driven hot air heaters had a defect that allowed exhaust fumes to mingle with the hot air, incapacitating crews, as was tragically seen with PT-80. The Aleutians were a constant reminder that the enemy was not always the only threat. nature itself was a relentless, soul-crushing foe. The environmental hazards escalated into a series of disasters in January 1943. PT-22 and 24 collided in a blinding snow squall, leaving both badly damaged. PT-27 suffered mangled struts and a holed bottom from unseen rocks. Days later, PT-22 ran aground on a reef, and PT-28 followed suit, both leaking badly. Towlines snapped, cleats ripped from decks, and despite desperate efforts, PT-28 was eventually abandoned to the merciless sea. These were not just losses of equipment, they were stark lessons in the Aleutian's capacity to destroy. Yet, amidst this brutal environment, PT boats continued their vital reconnaissance supply and mine-laying missions. Aircraft radar, mounted on some boats like PT-28, 75, and 79, offered a crucial, if imperfect, eye to see in the dark, through the ubiquitous fog. Even friendly fire was a risk, as on July 11, 1943, when PT-76 was unexpectedly strafed by an army bomber, with PT-73 heroically rescuing the ditched bomber's crew. When American forces prepared to reoccupy Kiska, on August 15, 1943, a tense, feint operation was staged at Vega Point. PT boats, ingeniously camouflaged to resemble barges laden with troops, made strafing runs under a heavy haze, creating a visually striking and tense scene of anticipation. Crews braced for the expected Japanese response, only to discover, to the profound surprise of the American forces, that the enemy had evacuated the island, leaving the landing unopposed. This moment encapsulated the bizarre, often anticlimactic nature of combat in this desolate theatre. The Aleutian campaign unequivocally debunked the myth of PT boats operating solely in warm tropical waters. Here they battled nature more often, and sometimes more fiercely, than they battled the enemy. As 1943 bled into 1944, the relentless Allied juggernaut pushed westward into the Central and Southwest Pacific. This strategic shift redefined the PT boat's role, consolidating squadrons and adapting to new strategic priorities and declining enemy activity in older theatres. Allied forces advanced along the New Guinea coast, securing Atape, Hollandia Waka, Biak, and Sanzapor. Each new landing created vast operational areas, necessitating the rapid establishment of major PT bases. Mios Wendy, a flat, sandy island 10 miles south of Biak, quickly became the finest base site the boats had encountered in New Guinea, thanks to its deep water lagoon. Further west, Amsterdam Island was secured. Though it offered little protection from shifting winds and seas, leading to a constant struggle to keep boats and floating equipment from blowing aground. The functional component system, rapidly deployed by CAB detachments, proved instrumental, with units like Lieutenant Harold F. Liberty's team quickly building piers and facilities, allowing PT boats to maintain their relentless pressure on enemy supply lines. This sustained pressure had a profound effect. In the Northern Solomons, the once frequent Japanese barge traffic, a lifeline for their isolated garrisons, began to dwindle. The marked decline in enemy barge sightings and contacts in early 1944 signaled a practical cessation of Japanese logistical efforts in the region without. PT claims for barges destroyed plummeted from dozens a month to a mere 3 barges destroyed and 1 damaged in June, and only 15 barges destroyed between July and October. The PT boats, having successfully contained Japanese forces, now found themselves tasked with new duties, such as sinking drifting mines, with some 50 claimed between July and September. Yet, even as enemy activity waned, the inherent dangers of naval warfare persisted. In May 1944, the Northern Solomons witnessed a final flare-up of enemy activity, particularly around Armden Island, where PT boats faced a cunning trap scenario. On the night of May 5th into the 6th, Lieutenant Jonathan S. Raymond, Jr., leading a section of 3 boats, including his own PT-247, sailed directly into an ambush. PT-247 was struck in the Engineer room by a large-caliber tracer projectile, mortally wounding Ensign R.J. Griebel. Raymond was last seen, heading aft on the starboard side of the burning vessel, which subsequently exploded. PT-250 also sustained damage, an engine hit on its first run. Lieutenant John S. Bonte arrived with PT-7 in response to Raymond's desperate call, and 357 in response to Raymond's desperate call, Raymond B. facing intense machine gun and artillery fire. This deadly encounter underscored the constant need for vigilance and the enduring strategic complexities faced by PT boat crews even when the larger tide of war had turned. The relentless westward advance culminated in a definitive strategic shift in late 1944. All naval responsibility in the Northern Solomons passed to General MacArthur's command and the 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Thomas C. Kinkady. With American forces landing in the Philippines in October 1944, the Solomons became a quiet backwater. Consequently, on November 24, 1944, Commodore Moran formally discontinued all PT patrols in the Northern Solomons, signifying the end of an era for PT boat operations in that theatre, the Mosquito fleet having proven its mettle in the frozen Aleutians and the steamy Solomons now followed the war's decisive trajectory, moving ever closer to Japan to battle for ease of the air. As the war in the Pacific entered its brutal final acts, the role of the PT boat, far from diminishing, continued to evolve, adapting to the changing nature of the conflict. The relentless westward push of Allied forces from the Solomons to New Guinea and into the Philippines meant PT boats were constantly finding new, often critical niches. No longer solely the Mosquito fleet conceived for daring torpedo runs against capital ships, they became versatile instruments of war, supporting major amphibious operations, disrupting the last vestiges of Japanese logistical efforts, and even engaging in specialized missions like mina-laying support and boarding enemy vessels for intelligence. Operations around Rabaul, for instance, had already demonstrated their effectiveness in sealing off enemy forces, leaving 40,000 Japanese troops to wither on the vine. This strategy of isolation, perfected in the Solomons, was replicated across numerous bypassed strongholds. PT boats, with their enhanced firepower and radar, continued to perform vital interdiction, reconnaissance, and close fire support, ensuring that Japanese garrisons, cut off from resupply, slowly suffocated. In the Philippines, they countered kamikaze attacks at Mindoro and contributed to the rout of Japanese task forces in the Battle of Surigao Strait. Later, in June 1945, PT boats were still active around Okinawa, a testament to their enduring relevance even in the shadow of larger naval assets. Even beyond the Pacific, American PT boats torpedoed German cargo lighters in the Mediterranean and overcame German boats in gunnery duels in the English Channel, participating in crucial operations like D-Day, showcasing their global versatility. The cumulative impact of these operations, from the desperate defense of the Philippines to the frozen Aleutians and the steamy Solomons, was profound. PT boats significantly contributed to the Allied victory by relentlessly disrupting supply lines, providing crucial support to ground forces, and filling critical gaps in naval strategy, particularly in shallow, reef-strewn waters, where larger ships could not venture. These were the proving grounds for the citizen sailors who manned the boats, operating with just 2 or 3 officers and 12 to 15 men on a small boat. PT crews experienced a uniquely high degree of personal engagement with the enemy. They fought at close quarters, often in the dark, usually under enemy fire. The deep-throated roar of the engines, a constant companion whether in reef and shark-infested waters or narrow waterways. This intimacy bred an extraordinary esprit de corps, where each man was individually important to his boat's success. While larger ship crews sometimes derisively called them spit kits, the shining courage and relentless adaptability of these men and their boats filled an important need. The PT boat program also spurred significant innovation in marine engine technology and hull design. The Packard marine engines, initially 1,200 horsepower, were refined to 1,300 horsepower, proving remarkably reliable, often performing even when partially submerged after 1,200 hours of use. Experimental designs like the Elcoplane that reached spectacular speeds of 55.95 knots pushed the boundaries of naval engineering, even if practical operational considerations led to their discontinuation. Lessons learned from the rigorous plywood derbies and the harsh realities of combat directly influenced future naval procurement and development, shaping the evolution of small craft warfare. Yet, a persistent myth shadowed their true capabilities, despite popular belief. Beside base were often exaggerated. Their actual performance was closer to 40 to 45 knots under ideal conditions, a speed that could deteriorate significantly due to maintenance issues and environmental factors. The crews themselves, with their dark humor, captured this reality in a sardonic ditty, "Oh, some PTT. When we get ours to run at all, we think we're doing fine." This candid assessment reflected the constant struggle against wear, tear, and the elements that was as much a part of their war as fighting the Japanese. The historical record, meticulously compiled by individuals with personal experience, like Captain Robert J. Bulkley, Jr., serves to foster greater appreciation for the courage, skill, and sacrifice of these PT boat sailors. Bulkley, who joined the service in June 1942 and was in Leyte Gulf on VJ Day, felt an immediate love at first sight for these vessels, recognizing them as new weapons of opportunity. His extensive manuscript, delivered to the Navy Department in 1946 and later published as At Close Quarters, adopted a constitutive. His extensive manuscript, delivered to the Navy Department in 1946 and later published as At Close Quarters, adopted a constitutive tonatas of 9 as new weapons of opportunity. His extensive manuscript and row of 12 to enemy damage claims, meticulously substantiating reports to create a more accurate and nuanced historical accounting of PT boat successes, moving beyond early exaggerations. Ultimately, the PT boat stands as a testament to the effectiveness of versatile small craft in asymmetric warfare and the enduring spirit of adaptability and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. President John F. Kennedy, himself a PT boat veteran, aptly summarized their legacy. PT boats filled an important need in World War II, in shallow waters, complementing the achievements of greater ships in greater seas. This need for small, fast, versatile, strongly armed vessels does not wane. Echoing the sentiment of John Paul Jones's desire to go in harm's way, the PT boat story is not just one of machines but of the brave men who took them into harm's way, carving out an indelible place in American naval history.